Story 1. The Shadow Snatchers. In the heart of the ancient Aztec Empire, amidst the bustling markets and towering pyramids, the gods were the center of life. Every action, every moment, was intertwined with their sacred rituals. Yet, one evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, something unimaginable occurred. The stars began to flicker in a strange pattern, as if the heavens themselves were shifting. The usual calm of dusk was replaced by an unsettling hum that vibrated through the ground. It was faint at first, a distant sound like the beating of a great unseen drum, but it grew louder, more powerful. People looked up to the skies, their eyes squinting against the fading light, as shadows stretched unnaturally long across the earth. From the heavens, a figure descended. No, not a figure, but a shape that tore through the sky like a rift in reality itself. A ship, gleaming and otherworldly, hovered above the city. It was not made of metal, but of something that shimmered like the night sky, darker than any star. The air around it warped and twisted, as though the very laws of nature bent at its presence. At first, the Aztecs believed it was a visit from Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent god, returning from the heavens as promised. But as the ship hovered lower, figures began to emerge. They were not gods. They were tall, thin, with skin like polished stone and eyes that gleamed with an eerie, unnatural light. Their faces were smooth, almost featureless, except for a single symbol carved across their foreheads, a symbol that no Aztec had ever seen before. One of them stepped forward, its voice a deep hum that reverberated through the air. "We come not for your gold, not for your land," it said, though its words seemed to twist the very air around it. "We come for your shadows." The people gasped. In Aztec belief, the shadow was a crucial part of one's soul, an extension of their very essence. To lose your shadow was to lose your life, to be separated from your spirit forever. Fear rippled through the crowd as the alien beings began to move, their long limbs gliding effortlessly across the earth. One of the Aztec priests, trembling, stepped forward and called out to the ship. "You cannot take what belongs to us. Our shadows are part of our soul. What will you do with them?" The alien who had spoken before responded, its voice now colder, more mechanical. "We do not wish to harm your souls. We simply collect them. It is the way of our kind. We have traveled across many worlds, harvesting what is ours to take." With a wave of its hand, the ground beneath the Aztecs began to tremble. The first of the aliens reached out, and in an instant, a warrior's shadow detached from his body. It writhed in the air, as if alive, and was pulled toward the alien's palm. The warrior collapsed, gasping, as his shadow was ripped from him, leaving him lifeless and gray. The air around him grew. The aliens moved swiftly, hunting those whose shadows were the brightest. The people tried to flee, but their shadows seemed to move of their own accord, tethered to their captors. They were no longer just human, they were prey. As more and more shadows were harvested, something strange began to happen. The sun, which had only moments before set in the west, began to rise again, but with an eerie, sickly glow. The sky was no longer the rich, deep purple of evening, but a cold, unnatural hue that made the very air feel wrong. Time, it seemed, was being twisted along with the shadows. The remaining survivors of the Aztec city, priests, warriors, and the occasional civilian, gathered in the great temple, their faces pale with fear. The high priest, trembling with ancient knowledge, stood at the altar, trying to make sense of what was happening. "The gods did not send these beings," he muttered, his eyes wide with dread. "These are not visitors. They are invaders, hunters. And they are hunting us, by our very essence. A young warrior, desperate and angry, clenched his fists. But why shadows? Why not take our lives, our blood as the gods do? Why are they after something so intangible? The high priest's face went ashen, his hands shaking as he realized something no one had understood before. The shadow is not just a reflection of the body. It is a mirror of the soul, the connection between the mortal and the divine. These creatures, they do not just seek our lives. They seek what sustains our very existence. Suddenly, a blinding light flashed from the sky, and the largest of the alien beings descended upon the temple. The people fell to their knees, their eyes blinded by the intensity of the glow. But when the light faded, the high priest looked up and gasped. The alien was no longer alone. From behind the towering figure, hundreds of smaller, darker forms emerged, creatures no taller than a child, their faces twisted and monstrous. They were not like the smooth, elegant aliens who had hunted the shadows. These creatures were savage, hungry, their eyes burning with malice. And then, in the high priest's mind, it clicked. The aliens weren't just collecting shadows. They were feeding on them. The shadows weren't merely a reflection of the soul, they were the true source of life, the energy that kept the universe in balance. And the aliens had discovered that the shadows of mortal beings were the purest source of energy. They consumed them not just for sustenance, but to fuel an even darker purpose. In that moment, the high priest understood the terrifying truth. The aliens didn't just take shadows, they twisted them, turning them into dark, hungry creatures. These twisted shadows would grow, feed on the remaining souls, and eventually consume everything. The clock, it seemed, had already begun its countdown. And the twist was that the Aztecs were not merely prey to the aliens. They were the vessel. The final piece of the puzzle clicked in the high priest's mind. The shadows weren't just being harvested. They were being replaced. The creatures that had once been humans would now become monstrous reflections, drawn from their own darkness. And in time, the very world would be consumed by these twisted, shadow-born monsters. The aliens weren't invaders, they were reapers, harvesting not just the life force of the Aztecs, but the souls themselves. What they left behind were nothing but hollow vessels, waiting for the shadows to return and feed on the next soul. The high priest raised his arms in a final, desperate prayer. But it was too late. The twist was complete. And now, the shadows were in control. Story 2. Fractured Reality. It was an ordinary Wednesday morning when Tom, a man of simple routines, stepped out of his apartment and onto the cracked pavement. The sun was rising lazily, casting a golden hue over the city as he adjusted his tie, ready to make his way to work. He always took the same route, the same steps, without fail. The bus was on time, the air was just cool enough to feel refreshing, and the world seemed to move as it always did, predictable, steady. But that morning, something was different. As Tom walked to the bus stop, the hairs on the back of his neck suddenly stood up. It wasn't the chill in the air that made him shiver, but a strange, unsettling hum that seemed to resonate through the very ground beneath his feet. He paused, looking up toward the sky, unsure of what had caused the sudden change in atmosphere. Then, from above, came a voice. It was a deep, mechanical sound, booming from the heavens themselves, yet somehow it felt too intimate, too close. It was neither warm nor cold, just flat. Emotionless. The countdown begins. Tom froze, his heart skipping a beat. The words echoed in his ears, and before he could react, a massive clock materialized in the sky. It was as if the very fabric of the sky had torn open, revealing a colossal, ticking timepiece that dwarfed the tallest buildings around him. The clock's face was cracked, the numbers distorted, and a menacing red hand swept across the dial. The city around him seemed to hold its breath, too. People stopped, staring at the sky in disbelief, their eyes wide with fear and confusion. Some whispered, some screamed. The hum that had started as a low vibration now pulsed louder, and the clock's hand ticked again. 3 hours, 59 minutes, 58 seconds. Tom's stomach dropped. There was no mistaking it, whatever was happening, it wasn't a joke. The voice had been clear, and the clock seemed to confirm it. "Is this the end?" Someone shouted from the crowd. Tom, normally a man of logic and reason, found himself fighting the panic creeping into his chest. He was just a regular guy, a 30-something office worker with a drab desk job. He had no idea what this clock meant. Was it an alien invasion? A warning? A government experiment gone wrong? The voice spoke again, this time with an unsettling calmness. "The countdown cannot be stopped." Tom's mind raced. He wanted to do something, to find answers, but his legs felt frozen to the spot. He couldn't move. His eyes stayed locked on the clock. The seconds ticked away, each one louder than the last. Suddenly, something strange happened. People began to react, not with panic, but with strange calmness, as though they knew exactly what was happening. Tom turned to see a man beside him, an older man in a suit, just like him, pull out a small, glowing device from his pocket. The man's fingers danced over it with practiced ease, swiping at symbols that Tom didn't recognize. Tom took a step forward, confused. What is that? Do you know what's happening?" The older man glanced at him, then smiled, a cold, knowing smile. "It's all part of the plan," he said cryptically, his eyes not meeting Tom's. "Don't worry, we've been preparing for this moment." "Preparing? For what?" Tom's heart hammered in his chest. But the man didn't answer. Instead, the clock's countdown reached its final minute. The voice echoed again. 5, 4, 3. The crowd around Tom, still eerily calm, seemed to lean toward the clock, as if they were drawn to it, as if it were magnetic. And then, just as the last second flicked away, the sky shattered. But not in the way Tom expected. Instead of an explosion, the world around him seemed to ripple, like the surface of a pond disturbed by a stone. The city, the people, the buildings, all of it distorted, as if reality itself was bending and warping. And then it hit him. He wasn't in the world he knew anymore. The streets were wrong. The colors of the sky were inverted, unnatural. People stood still, frozen in place, staring blankly ahead. The city had transformed into something alien, unfamiliar, as if the clock had not just marked the end of time, but had twisted the very fabric of existence itself. The older man stood next to him, still calm, still holding his glowing device. "You didn't think this was the end, did you?" he asked, his voice tinged with amusement. "This is just a shift. A new timeline." Tom's mind struggled to comprehend the words. "A new timeline? What are you talking about? What happened to the world?" "The countdown wasn't for destruction," the man said, turning his gaze to the sky, where the clock had now disappeared. "It was to change everything. The timeline reset. And you, Tom, are now part of this new world. Tom opened his mouth to argue, but the words caught in his throat. He felt different, as if the very air was pressing in on him. As if his mind was no longer his own. He glanced around at the people frozen in place, their eyes empty and vacant. Suddenly, Tom felt the familiar pull of the hum again, but this time, it wasn't the ground. It was inside him. "You're one of us now, Tom," the older man said, his voice barely audible as Tom's vision began to blur. "You're part of the new design." The hum grew louder, and in an instant, the world around him fractured into 1,000 pieces, each one slowly folding into place, until everything was different. The countdown had begun, yes, but it hadn't been about ending the world. It had been about replacing it. And Tom? Tom was now part of that replacement. Thank you for watching. Please like, share and subscribe for more Rogue Nightmares videos.